lead, you represent a constituency. Why the insistence that NGCDF needs to stay despite the repeat judgments that are coming from the courts?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. First and foremost, I think there is, in the roles that members of parliament have, one of the roles is to represent the people. The matter of CDF is a matter of concern to every citizen of the Republic of Kenya. In fact, if you traverse the country, in a lot of the corners of this country, the only visible projects you will see are actually those implemented by CDF. The biggest problem is a fallacy that members of parliament are the implementers of CDF. You know, CDF is actually, there's a CDF Act. Yeah. And the CDF Act is very clear about the implementers and those that are involved. Members of parliament are not involved in the implementation of CDF. It's very clear in law. Now, if any member of parliament is involved in the implementation, then that member of parliament has broken the law and they should be themselves taken to court and charged. But the thing is, the way CDF works is that, first and foremost, I've heard the Chief Justice say that they implement functions of counties. That is also not true. The CDF Act is very, very clear.
I think she was referring to the early Act, CDF 2013.
Incidentally, maybe the old Act, because that was amended. You see, the thing is, you also must understand that when laws are made and they breach or they offend the Constitution or they offend certain other articles in other laws, they can be amended. That is the work of Parliament. Sure. I mean, even Raila himself has said members of Parliament are supposed to legislate. So the legislation was put in place to make sure that the offensive clauses were removed. Now, CDF can only undertake responsibilities that are national government functions. That is education, and not ECD education or polytechnic, but university, colleges, TVETs, secondary schools and primary schools, and also security-based, projects. So basically, that is how CDF operates. Now, so I think where the problem is that people misunderstand the implementation of CDF and how CDF is supposed to work. Now, CDF is a kitty where the DCC, the Deputy County Commissioner, actually sits. And the CDF board has an officer that is sent to every constituency to help manage that fund. The district accountant, who is also an employee of government from the from Treasury, also is the one who has the authority to incur expenditure. So these people are that is where the national government representation is. Now, the representation of the people is by people that are appointed by that committee, that team, to come together so that they can be able to agree on what are the projects that can be implemented and how will they be implemented. I think the worst thing is that I think it's a political game. That when a member of parliament stands somewhere and says we need a class put up here, he's only speaking the way the president does. When the president goes to functions and says, oh, we will do roads, we will do, yet he doesn't even have the power of the purse. It's parliament that has the power of the purse. So members of parliament can be advised to desist from making comments that will make CDF look like it is a kitty controlled by members of parliament.
But is the issue here just about the members of parliament or the fund itself where it sits? Because if NGCDF stands to finance functions of the national government, why can the national government just do it?
In fact, Sam, let me tell you that when you talk about devolution, we are talking about two levels. The national government and the county government. Now, what was the reason that devolution was actually proposed? So that funds can get closer to the people. So the CDF model as a national government function is actually a very good system of making sure that funds are shared fairly and equally amongst all constituencies and that development is spread out in the whole country. Before CDF, there were corners of this country where schools were dilapidated, where the chief offices were dilapidated, police stations were in tatters. So CDF has actually created a situation where there is some fairness in the distribution of resources. The only problem with CDF, Sam, is not the implementation. It is actually the existence of members who seem to stake claim over the CDF as if
which you have cured in the law by amending
which you have
and removing
cured
every
in
role.
the law. So right now, I don't even see where
so
there's so
then
much.
What do you say? Before I get to Wakili and Honorable Susion, what do you say to the finding by the High Court, and I think previously also by the Supreme Court, that constituencies are electoral units? They're not centers of service or service delivery centers. They're just supposed to be for electoral representation.
So, Sam, let me tell you, we as representatives of the people and legislators have every right to come up with any law. We can come up with a fund, and at any time, because it is within the law. It is constitutional. It is our mandate. So to come up with a law that creates a fund that distributes and shares the money out amongst every corner of the country, I think there's nothing wrong with that. And some, I'll tell you, there's a proposal which I'm supporting, that even when we are doing the national government budget every year, we must be able to know how much money is going to every constituency, so that there's fairness in distribution of resources and people can stop fighting for the presidency because they think when the president comes from their region, they will get more than other people. It's important. And then areas where they will never get a president because of the tribal manner in which we do our elections, then those people can also get their fair share of the resources of this country. So the thing is, I don't see anything absolutely wrong with CDF, except a few individuals that are constantly getting involved and making it seem like it is their tool. So what is happening is this, Sam. People who want to be elected to parliament will fight the member of parliament, and the easiest way to fight them is through CDF. You will always hear people stand and say, oh, this person has stolen CDF, or they've not done that, they've not done this. And so they demonize CDF because of the member of parliament. That is where the problem is. And some will also tell you that, and this must also go on record, that Kenyans have never acclimatized to the new constitution. So some of us as members of parliament, we have a very big problem dealing with the public on certain issues. The citizens believe that when you're elected as a member of parliament, it's your responsibility to find development for them. It is your responsibility to find jobs for them. It is your responsibility to make them richer. And these are things that are very complicated. So I think when CDF exists at the constituency level, where at least a member of parliament may have, when in representing their people, may be able to ask that, can this committee consider doing the following in that institution? I think that's a fair thing. But otherwise, the direct involvement and implementation of projects by members of parliament, that would be unconstitutional. I wouldn't support that myself.
All right. Now, Wakili Mahanu, talk to us, because it looks like it's parliament versus the law, or parliament versus the judiciary on the question of NJCDF. And he makes a passionate plea here. And if you ask Kenyans, they'll tell you that indeed they have seen the impact of CDF, because it's been in existence since 2000. And the law is 2003, but the first release was in April 2004, so 22 years of sorts. And there's that relationship with such a fund. It's being taken away. Of course, at every project you see the indications on when this was implemented, which financial year, who was the member of parliament. And they said that for constituency funds, you don't necessarily see that. So how do we respect the Constitution while at the same time respecting this a bit of attachment that Kenyans would have?
Now, first of all, Kenyans need to understand, why was it necessary to introduce CDF in Kenya? You will realize that CDF was introduced way back in 2003. And during that time, we had a centralized system of government, a unitary system of government. And even before 2003, there were so many efforts to try and to decentralize, funds from national government to grassroots level. You remember the so-called district focus for development in rural areas and so on and so forth, which of course were devised on the same principle of decentralizing resources to the grassroots. But and when CDF was introduced at that time in 2003, the constitution at that time did not envisage devolved units of disbursement of resources from the national government.
Right.
So, but fast forward after the 2010 constitution, we now had a formalized way of decentralizing resources from the national government to the grassroots through devolution. And you see, the reason why we have so many whimpers concerning the role of the position of a CDF vis-a-vis the law is because the concept of executive, the concept of the judiciary, the concept of parliament stems from the doctrine of separation of powers, such that the maker of the concept of separation of power envisaged that the executive will be responsible for policy making and execution of policies, and then parliament will be responsible for legislation, and judiciary will be responsible for interpreting the law. So as it stands today, based on the constitution that we have, the role of parliament is to legislate, oversight, and representation. The reason why the courts have had issues with involvement of MPs with CDF is because, first of all, and based on the most recent decision, is that the court said that NG CDF as designed was first of all passed without the involvement of the Senate. That means they, after the Supreme Court declared CDF Act unconstitutional, they went and changed its name. They went and removed some of its role. But they forgot one thing, that the primary role of Parliament is oversight and legislation, as well as representation. And there is separation of powers. By involving members of Parliament in any form of development, in any form of disbursing funds, then you are arrogating them to the position of the executive. Yet the Constitution, the way it's framed, there are distinct responsibilities and functions of these arms of government. So that's the first issue that court took issue with. The other issue that the court took issue with the involvement of MPs with the CDF is that it appears to be establishing a parallel system to devolution, yet it is not envisioned in the government, in the constitution. Now, and then the third issue was that, of course, by giving themselves this role, Parliament has now been turned itself into a small executive, whereby it is now implementing the function of the executive. So most importantly...
You don't find it sufficient that in subsequent amendments since the judgment on CDF 2013, there has been an effort to remove the role of the Member of Parliament. You actually don't see them anywhere.
There is an effort, but the problem is this. We have a constitution which establishes only 2 units of devolving funds, national government and county governments. There is no any other thing like Parliament. If Parliament wants, it can pass good legislation where national government is disbursing these funds directly to the grassroots through the ministries that it has. You see? So that is what...
So what should that grassroots look like? Is it the ward? Is it the county?
Government through the executive executes its policies through ministries. For example, if government wants to build schools, let it just direct that money towards the Ministry of Education and let it plan properly.
And how do you determine, let's take this case in point. I'll get to you, Honorable Sosion. So there is a clause that up to 40% of CDF funds can be used for matters of education, and bursaries are actually recognized as development projects.
Fine.
Through the law, that is. So if you take away the structure of GCDF that shares resources, that this is the basket for Kadiani constituency, for instance, which is your constituency?
I come from Cherangani constituency.
Yes, so let's assume this is the basket for Cherangani constituency. If you take that away, how do you suggest that the Ministry of Education shares the same resources to your constituency?
Now, one thing we must appreciate, Sam, is that the law has already been interpreted. That is the first thing. Because government has a responsibility of upholding the Constitution. And the court having delivered itself very expressly that by 30th June 2026, CDF and anything associated with CDF must be retired.
Right.
Then it behooves now the government to ensure that it sits back and comes up with a structure that will be streamlined with and in accordance with the Constitution as far as development at grassroots is concerned. So it is not something that is difficult. If it was possible for CDF then under the centralized form of government to work, it's also possible for CDF through the Constitution that we have to work by streamlining what we have in terms of disbursing these resources from the national government to the grassroots. And it's just a question of amendment.
That's exactly my
law.
question.
Yes.
So how do you suggest that the people who live in Cherangani still benefit as they are under CDF?
Now, CDF can be redeployed to be in line with the county government, such that this money goes through county government.
But then that would be a county executing a national function.
Now, and I have said it before,
yeah,
national government executes its policies through the ministries. We have the Ministry of Education. Money that is meant to develop schools can be disbursed through the Ministry of Government because the Ministry of Education has got its presence in Cherangani constituency and in Trans Nzoia constituency. That money can reach.
That is at the county level and sub-county level.
What do you mean?
I'm asking because members of the national, officials of the national government.
Yes.
You'll find a county director of education.
Sure.
Then you'll find maybe a sub-county.
Yes.
So is that the structure you want them to follow?
No. The Constitution has demarcated the roles. Education is a function of the national government, and those resources can reach the grassroots level through the structures of national government. Let us not mix the two issues.
Okay.
We were meant to oversight, and what you've raised here, even though it might seem academic, it also was academic even in the law, and that's why we got rid of it. Some of the problem we have with the CDF is a historical problem. And I'm happy that, one of our panelists has taken us back up to the time when it started. In 2003, when the fund was started, members of parliament walked around with a checkbook of CDF in their coat pocket.
In their pockets.
And when they would come across someone who wants bursary, they would pull out the checkbook and give them, sign for them a check. They go and, pay their school fees.
Yeah.
And I think that is the assumption that it's still like that. It has completely changed. The members of parliament no longer have any access to the money. They have no access to the control. They have not access to the implementation. Now, the reason why NGCDF succeeds so much is because it's also a fund that has very, very little overheads. Because, at the constituency level, the implementers are actually government people. And I've said national executive. Because the fund account manager is part of the national executive. Is from the CDF board, which of course operates, is a fund, and all funds are controlled by Treasury.
Correct.
The person with the authority to incur expenditure is a district accountant, who's an officer sent to every constituency by Treasury.
Yeah.
The DCC, who is the person responsible for security in the constituencies, sits in that committee. Then now a few members of the general public are picked and put in to form the committee. And they are the ones that go around, listen to the views of the public, and get to know what are the gaps or shortcomings that the public would like them to sort. After that, the money is sent to the constituency, and then they implement these projects. When I hear people say that members of parliament are involved in the implementation, I would like to understand exactly where. Yeah. Because it's not in law, and it's also not practical. The only reason, Sam, is that members of parliament will always stand there when projects are being, they're being given.
Right.
And would stand there and say, wow, this is a beautiful project. We are a CDF Kadhiani. We are implementing this.
Yeah.
Because you can also distance yourself from good things. So the only benefit members of parliament get is political capital when they stand there. And that is what political enemies of members of parliament don't want to see. Otherwise, there's no illegality at all in the implementation of CDF. Now, the other thing I needed to say is this, that court did determine that the NGCDF law act did not have to go through Senate. That was determined because the implementation of NGCDF does not touch on matters that are concerning counties. Because there's a schedule, I think it's a fourth schedule, or is it fourth schedule that distributes functions between the national and the county and the county level. So the CDF only implements projects that are at the level of the national government. Now, I want to say, yes, it is true that there is devolution. But the thing is, you cannot devolve the function of building of primary classes, secondary classes, distribution of bursary to the counties. So it has to end up being done at the constituency level. Why is it we are moving away from the national level? It's very difficult to implement projects across the country from the headquarters. And that is why devolution started in the first place. So Parliament, in its wisdom, is supporting the continuation of the fund so that these monies are distributed to every constituency and there is fairness in the distribution of resources. The only reason why CDF can be supported is because it takes money to the grassroots. And every corner you find a primary school has got new classes, a primary school has an administration block, a chief has an office, a police station has been put up. That is the only reason why we would support
what
that.
stops the Interior Ministry from building a chief's office?
Some you've been around. You've been around in this country for so long. Tell me,
not so long.
the CS of education came to Parliament last year, and I was questioning him about the issue of the grade 9 classes.
Yeah.
And he was there saying, oh, we'll have all these classes put up by the end of the year. By 2025, our children will be comfortable.
Yeah.
I want to report here that at least a third of our schools do not have a grade 9 class. At least a third of Kenyan primary schools do not have a grade 9 class. And they didn't only need a grade 9 class, they also needed a lab for sciences and probably another lab for pre-technical subjects. The thing is this, that CDF is able to reach to the farthest corners. It actually helps the government in its implementation because this is the money is from the national executive. The only thing that is happening is that we are finding a way to make sure that money reaches the grassroots. You remove the name of the member of parliament from CDF and everybody will support it.
No, well, that's good, but the High Court found, they said, the time is now ripe for the people of Kenya to appreciate that a constituency is not a service delivery unit, but of representation, and that the role of the member of the National Assembly must remain that of representation, legislating, and oversight. That point of service delivery unit, a constituency is not a service delivery unit, is also critical. You have addressed the question of member of parliament, who is no longer in law visible. Of course, they're visible on the ground, you know that, but not visible in law. But then that question of a service delivery unit, and that's the question I was asking Wakili on how he would suggest that these resources be taken and reach the people on the ground. He says we follow the national government structure, but failed to define how that structure should be.
No, Sam, maybe just to
in closing.
Yes. We have a constitution that spells out very clearly how taxes and resources from the national government are supposed to be decentralized. We have, and the architecture of the constitution was that most of the resources that are supposed to spells out that funds from the national government will reach the grassroots level through two channels, the national government and the county governments. Now, we find it a bit difficult to say that the national government can ensure that projects at the national, at the county, at the grassroots level can be implemented. We find it very difficult, and we seem to give scenarios where the national government has failed. But when it comes to collection of taxes, the national government does very well. So using the same channels when it comes to collecting taxes and imposing taxes on Kenyans, the national government should man up and ensure that implementation and decentralization of revenue from its structures to the grassroots gets to the people. The other cadre, of course, is the county governments. County governments are supposed to work. The only problem is that there has been delay of releasing funds, and even the funds that get there, most of the funds are lost through corruption. So if we can seal these loopholes, this can work without any problem.
You say most of the funds. I thought they also use resources to pay salaries.
But most of the funds are lost. How many times have we had people being taken to EACC for stealing public money? I mean, it's not a secret anymore.
To finalize that debate we were having a bit earlier, you know, a number of serious things have come up that when we keep talking about IPOA getting involved, we forget that IPOA, of course, like has come out here, doesn't oversight the military, and the military were deployed. I think this thing falls squarely in the hands of the DCI. It's a responsibility. There must be rule of law, and they must be seen to be doing what is expected of them. But the reason some of these things become very emotive to some of us is because these killings did not just happen inside Parliament. The very first person that was killed out there, 29-year-old Erickson Mutisia, is from Kadhiani constituency, a place called Kisekini. So he was killed in the tarmac outside Parliament. And that was before they breached the fence. In fact, I want to imagine that that's probably one of the reasons why the youth were even more enraged, because they were unarmed. And when one of their own is killed, in cold blood outside, that obviously must have annoyed them. But some I want to I just mentioned how Parliament is captured, and I felt that maybe I need to elaborate. That what happened is the military were deployed to the streets. Military ordinarily cannot be deployed to the streets within the country without the consent of Parliament. Now, and I want you to go back to the records of Hansard, because this happened on June 25th. That's when the military was in the streets. You check the Hansard records for the next day, because we're in Parliament the next day, in the morning. We attempted, that time as a minority party, to ask questions about how it was possible for the military to have been deployed to the streets of Nairobi without Parliament's approval. It was impossible for us to speak. It was, a motion was brought to the floor that was completely illegal and hastily passed by a few members of the majority that were in the House. So this is a problem we face as a country, that the rule of law is constantly ignored, even in Parliament itself. So that's why we have a problem. Now, on the matter of IEBC selection panel, I do not want to cast aspersions on the work that the selection panel is doing. I think it was transparent. We saw the interviews that were being shown on TV, and we saw the questions that were posed to the applicants and the responses. I just want to say that as a country, we need to get it right when it comes to the IEBC commission, because a big chunk of our problem comes from the electoral result. Every 5-year cycle we have contested elections, and this puts us at a situation where for 5 years we will almost be electioneering. Because immediately after an election, there's always a conflict. We didn't lose. We end up in court. The court makes a decision. Remember, some time back, the court made a decision that the elections were not exactly conducted in the right manner. There was no repeat election, or rather, the repeat election, one of the candidates did not participate. But we had to move on as a country. So I think we need to get it right. And the referee in an election is a very, very important person. What I would advise is that whoever they pick must be somebody that will give hope to Kenyans, and make Kenyans feel that the next election will be handled in the correct manner. So I don't want to cast aspersions. I also don't want to speculate. I want to wait, but we want to tell them that we want them to do the right thing. Let us have people of men and women of, credible men and women of this country that can help us run the next election fair. Okay.
Despite what I think your party leader and the likes of Martha Karua and Eugene Omala have said before.
Some I want to clarify so that, because this matter, I think there's a bit of confusion about it. When the broad-based, agreement was being signed, between ODM and UDA, the very first point there was that they must implement NADCO the NADCO report fully. That is what they said they would have to do. And for your information, as we transition to the debate on NGCDF, you realize that it was also part of the NADCO report, which means that the broad-based government players have already signed to support. Now, in the NADCO report, it stated that once they settle on individuals, before the president makes the appointment, he has to sit with the leader from Azimio so that they can make that decision together. That is in the report. And so my leaders are speaking about the report that was coined by both Kenya Kwanza and Azimio coalition, which is the NADCO report. Now, we have noted, and every Kenyan knows, that the leader of Azimio, our presidential candidate in 2022, is now sitting at the same table with the leader of Kenya Kwanza. And part of us who are part of Azimio are not at that table because we are not part of the broad-based government. So the question is, when they are making that decision, they'll make that decision together. There'll be nobody representing us as part of Azimio that has been left outside. So that's why we were saying, if there were to be any consultations, let them exist. But let also
the country are highly emotive. And they are highly emotive because there is always suspicion that, particularly if someone loses an election, there's always suspicion that the process has not been fair because one of the key players, critical players, being the IBC, which is the referee, has not been fair to them. And those ones that IBC ends up announcing as the winners, they always praise IBC for doing a good job. But what we need to understand is that for us to get that assurance as Kenyans that the election process is going to be above board, it starts with how the IBC is put in place. And all of us agree that getting the selection panel to start the process was not an easy task. And therefore, it was a requirement that most political players, starting with the president and the opposition leader, to try as much as they can to stay away from this process so that it can infuse confidence that this process is devoid of any political interference. But once we see these political players sitting down and deciding on how now the process should be moved on, the way Honorable Mbui is saying, at that point, clearly it can be shown that this process is not devoid of any political interference. And at that point, there is perception that even at the end of the tail end, whoever we are going to have as the IBC chair cannot be far away from the reach of these political players. But most importantly, we have seen the accusations that have already come up regarding the selection process, the way it's being conducted. What the chair of the selection panel ought to have done is that once there are these allegations, he needs to come out and explain what was the need. If at all there were 6 names that were sneaked at the tail end after the names have been shortlisted, he needed to explain why they had to reopen and allow these names, or why he must have given a credible explanation why he had to reopen and add these names, because at that point already there is suspicion that has been created, and I will not be surprised if someone will go to court on that account. But probably also it could be a setup so that this process does not end up with a credible IBC, so that we continue with the status quo, because if the status quo is there are so many people that are going to benefit. But having said that, as to whether we have a credible election or not, the courts have already spoken and expressed themselves on this issue. If elections can be determined at polling stations based on the minor KI decision, we are going to have very little problems, because if players and agents from all the political players are at the polling stations and that becomes the results that are finally announced, then we do not have problems. But if we again give the decision to announce the results by the IBC chairman at Bomas of Kenya, that's when problems come. So if we can remain true to what the law has said in terms of where our results are announced, that is at the polling station, we are going to have very little problems. An institution like the Select Panel will be trusted by Kenyans if they don't act in a suspicious manner. By allowing 6 names to be sneaked into the list, that creates suspicion.
You just said they were not sneaked in.
They were not sneaked in.
There has been no explanation as to why the 6 names are being mentioned outside the normal names that applied.
But he said it was for regional and inclusivity purposes when it was gazetted. I think it was on a Tuesday.
And then, most importantly, why did they have to wait until that issue has been raised by the media? Why didn't they come out on their own account to explain? That is the suspicion we are talking about. And it's a good thing that yesterday BBC was able to unravel the real situation. And these are things that Kenyans have been speaking about. Of course, right now the arrangement that we have in government is that the opposition and the government are now together, and they said that some of the conditions that they gave the government is that individuals who are responsible for the killing of the young people during the last year's protests are going to be prosecuted and processed through the court process. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. And I'm not surprised when we see that report from BBC, because I think many Kenyans have been waiting to see justice being delivered by the government, which, of course, you'll remember that the government itself has promised, not once but on several occasions, that it's going to ensure that those who are responsible for the lost lives are going to be prosecuted. So for me, I do not expect, there is a lot of non-commitment from the part of the government, and I do not expect any justice to come from the side of government. What needs to be done is that concerned and parties and stakeholders, for example, civil societies, Law Society of Kenya, they need to mount up pressure and possibly file up these cases and references in court so that we have these individuals whom we have seen in the full glare of the cameras executing these young people. We have seen the cases of Baby Pendo. The responsible individuals are being prosecuted. So justice can only come if we have pressure mounting from the stakeholders and civil society and LSK. But on the part of the government, I do not think they have that commitment.
You know, that's interesting because when we have asked these questions to the former Interior Minister, now Deputy President, Professor Kithure Kindiki, when we have asked former Defense Cabinet Secretary, now Health, that is Aden Duale, they have always pushed the question and said that's the relevant department. For Aden Duale said that this was an internal operation. The KDF was only coming in to support. The Interior Minister said he's not a police investigator. He has to wait on the authorities, in this case IPOA. And now you're saying that we do not expect any action to be taken. Yet there are state agencies that have been assigned that role by constitution and different laws. Then why do we have them?
Now, you know, that is the problem with our society today and the government as by extension. We have a constitution and the laws, but many a times you will see that the government is very comfortable when orders or processes that follow the law favor them. They will go an extra mile in ensuring that, and you'll see statements being issued from government agencies that citizens have a responsibility to respect the law, citizens have to conform with the law. But many a times we have seen the same government violating orders or processes of the court that have been dictated by the law. Now, the reason why I'm saying that I expect very little from the government is that right up to this moment, and I was watching that documentary, and the response that they gave is that they tried to give an opportunity to the government to participate in the production of the documentary. But the reports that are coming from the police and the KDF, more specifically the police, is that the police cannot investigate itself. That is what the documentary says. Yeah. That they tried reaching out to the police, but the police said they cannot investigate themselves. Yet the police has internal mechanisms of disciplining members of their forces who have violated the law. We have IPOA. But
IPOA has said that the police has been uncooperative.
I will not be surprised. The police, if they have the guts to issue the statement that they cannot investigate themselves, I do not expect anything reasonable to come out of them. And it's for the reason. Yep. They know that they are guilty as charged, and there is no way of getting out of it. So they know already that these atrocities have been committed. So there is even no point of investigating. Because at the tail end, if they investigate, the verdict will be that they violated the law. And there was a wanton and reckless execution of these young people.
Mheshimiwa Mboi, now, nearly 10 months later, has Parliament even attempted to find answers to these questions?
Let me just say that you've started off on the wrong footing, because Parliament has been neutered, as you are aware. I think there would be a Kenyan, I don't think there's any Kenyan who doesn't know the situation we are in as a country, because Parliament is controlled by the executive. I mean, that's common knowledge.
Yeah.
But allow me to first condemn, in the strongest terms possible, those individuals that have decided to go against our constitutional rights, right to information, right to speech, and even right to picketing, and those that have already issued statements against the media because of the expose by BBC. I mean, to hear leaders argue that this should stop being aired in Kenya, this documentary, because it exposes the nation, I think that's really unfortunate and unacceptable. Because as a country, we should have gone beyond that level. The real thing is that things did happen. Children were killed. Our children were killed. They were killed for no good reason. And therefore, this has to be exposed so that we can be sure that this problem doesn't go on. Now, Sam, on the matter of the killing of Gen Zs, it is a criminal offense. And the police, the DCI, the DPP, are basically supposed to investigate every crime. Now, when you talk about the slow movement of the investigation, it surprises me because BBC reporters have no access to the information that Kenyan government and the police have. But they were able to come up with a report, even to show individuals that were involved in the killings. But the reality is that Kenyan police know who killed the Gen Zs. Because most of those that were shot, the bullets can be traced back to the gun that was fired. And the gun that was fired can be traced back to the individual that was handed over that gun that morning. So this information is clearly in the hands of the police. What they are doing is actually trying to block justice from prevailing. And that is why I'm saying the expose was a good thing.
Yep.
Media must continue talking about these things so that these things can be brought out to the open. Now, IPOA, yes, does exist, and the purpose of IPOA is obviously to assist whenever there is issues to do with the police.
Yeah.
But for me, I look at it from this perspective, that IPOA probably would need to deal with the issues of discipline of police officers. We are talking about a criminal offense. This is a responsibility of DCI and his team. They should investigate, they should prosecute, DPP should send those people to court and let let justice prevail. It is unfortunate that as a country, we are talking about this thing so many months later. We are going to another, actually we are just about to finish a year, because in June we'll have done a year since that happened. And it is clear that the government is hell-bent on making sure that nothing happens and these things are not sorted out.
And that's why I asked the question. You say it's the wrong footing, but I'm deliberate in asking the question because the National Assembly is, should I say, body corporate, but at the same time, members of Parliament acted individually. Has there been any effort by a single member of Parliament, including yourself, to find closure to these matters?
One of the things, let's first agree what is the responsibility of Parliament. It is not to investigate criminal offences. That is the work of the police.
Sure.
So when it comes to what we can do is ask why the police are too slow. But you've already had the answers. They've already given answers and said we don't investigate ourselves. That's already, it's an answer that has come out in this set. I've heard you mention that today. So already the police have given answers.
But Parliament can demand action.
We can demand answers, yes. But the reality is that, in my opinion, let's lift the veil on this issue. This was a matter that was concerning Parliament. This was a problem that was caused by the Parliament of the Republic of Kenya. Because when the young people came out and said, do not continue the debate on this finance bill, and we want you to shoot it down, Parliament in its wisdom decided to go against the wishes of the youth. And voted in support of a finance bill that was highly punitive. That is where the problem starts. And that is why Parliament would be very quiet about this thing. Because the problem is Parliament.
Including you, who was opposed to the bill.
I am not part of the quiet ones. But Sam, there are processes in the House. And there are leadership. There is leadership in the House. And it is not easy for an individual member to be able to prosecute whatever they want on the floor of the House without the powers that be to...
You can raise a statement.
Sorry?
You can't raise a statement asking a question.
I think that's already been done. That's already been done.
And have there been answers?
I think we are waiting for answers. That's already been done. There's been a question on the matter of what happened and what is the process, what is the progress. I think that question is already there.
Okay.
Soon, Sam will have the CS for Interior answering those questions.
Okay. Never mind that he.
But you see, my negativity. He
was at transport at the time of these events.
You know, my negativity is that what will happen? It will be a talk shop. He will come and give answers. They will be half baked. And then that will be the end of that story. That's why I am very concerned that the criminal justice system, which doesn't include Parliament for your information, should just do its job. Sure. Let us get these people prosecuted. Let us have some people serve jail terms so that we can know at least that, in Kenya, the law is being respected.
You're spot on.
Million members of our disciplined forces. Above all is the Constitution. And the Constitution has demarcated very clearly that any offense committed within the territory of Kenya can be investigated through the powers that have been given to the DPP and the DCI. So you look at those footages and you can see clearly that, first of all, when these shots were being fired to these protesters, they were literally walking away from Parliament. At that point, at that particular point, there was no imminent threat that will warrant this KDF officer from firing the shots. You can see he shot and fired these protesters from behind. So you can't really say that these people were acting in a manner that was a threat to him to warrant him to use the firearm. Most importantly, these protesters were not armed. So there was no reason at all. And we have seen globally how officers try to restrain protesters and how to manage protests. If protesters are not armed, they are not violent, there is no reason whatsoever to use a firearm. Most importantly, what we saw during the Gen Z protest, that was not a mutiny. Those were Kenyans who were tired about the taxes that had been put on them by this regime. So you can't say that it is a mutiny. Because if it was a mutiny as such, then the president would not have agreed and withdrawn that bill, being the main reason. But most importantly, Sam, that KDF officer is subject to the Constitution of Kenya. The DCI can investigate him and have him prosecuted because what he did is not in line with the objectives and the purpose of KDF. KDF did not send him to shoot at those protesters who are not armed at that particular point.
Interesting. And of course,
he's not here because he knows clearly that last year during the protests, he issued also another statement saying that if any of his child does not attend the protest, then he's going to demand for a DNA. So, Kaluma is a guy who changes based on convenience.
Let's not discuss
I know he's not here, but we are responding to his statement. The statement was reckless. That's why I am finding it a bit unrestrained to respond to it.